You're listening to the 49 Carats Podcast, a 49ers Goldmine production with Stephanie Sanchez.
What's going on, everyone? Welcome to another edition of the 49 Carats Podcast. I'm your host, Steph. It is Wednesday, May 29th. OTAs are back, or at least the reports for OTAs are back because the 49ers media was on hand to give us all the updates from today. We also got to hear from a couple of 49ers coaches, and we got some big news today, which we're going to start off by talking about right now. Jauan Jennings gets a new deal. It's a 2-year deal for Jauan Jennings. This is pretty big. I gotta give it up to him because I'm pretty sure last week I was like, this is very risky by Jauan Jennings. If you guys recall, he didn't show up to OTAs last week. The reports were it was because he wanted a new deal. He hadn't signed his restricted free agent tender yet. And so the risk pays off for him. I mean, he got a new deal, 2 years worth up to $15.4 million, including $10.5 million guarantee. Now, as far as the implications for the 49ers go, I mean, I don't think this deal really hurts him that much. I mean, he was already due to get paid $4.9 million in 2024 with this deal. Again, we don't know the specifics of how it's structured, although it's just a 2-year deal, so it can't be too complicated. You're looking at an APY of $7.7 million, so just a couple million more than what he'd be getting paid in 2024. At least the initial numbers would suggest as much. And then, yeah, I mean, in 2025, he'd be under contract for about the same amount, and I would assume, but again, we don't have the final numbers. We don't know how it's going to be structured for those 2 years and how they split that money up. But just initially, we can assume it's around 7.7 APY. If you look at it that way, I mean, I'm not mad at this. I'm not mad at this for the 49ers. I'm not mad at this for Jauan Jennings. I'm glad he got the bag. What's going on to everyone that joined? Sorry, I just kind of jumped into that, but I did want to mention, obviously, I usually do my shows on Wednesday with Desi. Our schedules did not commingle today, if that's even a word. So it's just going to be me today. So here's what I want to have happen. Live chat needs to be popping. Y'all better lock in, keep me entertained in the live chat. I'm gonna circle back to some of these comments when I need a drink of water, because when I'm here by myself, like the throat gets a little dry. So I need to circle back to some of these comments. Make sure you guys leave me some good ones here. But back to Jauan Jennings. Yeah, I mean, for a player who works as hard as he does, has improved as much as he has in the time that he's been here in San Francisco, I think this shows that for guys who are maybe younger players who haven't gotten their second deal in the NFL yet, Jauan Jennings is the perfect example of, hey, these are the things you should be doing if you want to get that second contract with this team. And George Kittle did speak with the media at some point today, and he had some glowing things to say about Jauan Jennings, and I think this encapsulates it. Is that a word? This just summarizes Jauan Jennings perfectly. He says, quote, "I think every single person in the NFL that watches tape, every general manager, every scout, anybody that watches tape, they look at Jauan's film and they're like, holy cow, this guy is one of one. His mindset and his attitude when he's on the field is completely different." I would have to agree with Jauan Jennings, who was well on his way to being Super Bowl MVP had the 49ers pulled that game out. So, yeah, happy for Jauan. As far as what this maybe means for Brandon Ayuk, I don't think it changes anything in the Brandon Ayuk front. I mean, again, this is really just $2 million more, about $2 million more this season that the 49ers are allocating to Jauan Jennings. And so I do have to say that as a whole, assuming that Brandon Ayuk does get his deal, to have your 3 top wide receivers on extensions or like on new deals, um, that's crazy because like that just means they've invested so much to their wide receiver room. I mean, we just saw the Eagles sign their 2 top receivers this offseason to new deals. And so, I mean, it might be an interesting way to allocate money, but I mean, this might just be the way that the NFL is going towards. Maybe the 49ers wanted to, uh, you know, more 3 wide receiver sets, more 4 wide receiver sets. I don't know. But I mean, it definitely feels like the 49ers are comfortable paying their wide receivers money. And that would seem to suggest that they're going to continue to have involvement in this offense. Now you might be saying to yourself, well, Jauan Jennings only had 19 catches last year. What are you talking about involvement? I would just say that clearly Jauan Jennings does things other than catching the football, such as blocking, and he does that really well. That is something that the 49ers covet quite a bit, especially from their receivers. I mean, I got to wonder if with the 49ers not exactly in a great spot at tight end 2. I mean, they lost 2 of their tight ends behind George Kittle. Usually, those guys were your blocking tight ends. Maybe we see a shift where, they're having Jauan Jennings be a blocker, kind of take that role a little bit more than he did in the past. Maybe Kyle Juszczyk could take that role. I don't know, but it certainly seems like, hey, we lost a couple of good blockers. We have Jauan Jennings, who's a great blocker. We have someone like Kyle Juszczyk, who's a great blocker. Maybe we can just utilize them, where appropriate. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely interesting. I think Jauan Jennings is deserving of this, raise. Again, I thought it was a risky move for him, given that the 49ers drafted Ricky Pearsall and Jacob Cowing just a month ago. And so I was like, I don't know if this risk of him missing OTA is going to pay off for him, but clearly it did pay off, literally. So let me circle back to some of these comments. All right, you guys listen to me. The live chat is popping. Thank you. Thank you. Technic Chic says, Steph, can we talk about the real important stuff? Like Kittle looking like he got a haircut, JK. Yeah, this is so funny. I did talk about Rob about this yesterday because I don't think he actually got a haircut. Like, because I've thought this in the past before, and really, he just likes to have his hair inside of his cap. So he was wearing a hat. It just looked like, usually he does shave the back half, which by the way, I got a haircut today. So if you guys, yeah, it's looking good. Shout out my barber. So he had his, the back of his hair cut, and he has a mullet. So like obviously behind the long hair, he cuts it. Anyway. So I don't think he cut his hair. That will be revealed at some point soon. He was not at OTAs today, so we couldn't confirm, but I'm pretty sure. Rob D says, don't remember what wide receiver said in an interview that JJ was hardest working guy in the building. Yeah, I don't recall which wide receiver said that, but there was another quote, and I think it was an older quote, but I just saw it in a article from, I think it was the Chronicle, just recalling an older quote from Fred Warner, who said something similar about Jauan Jennings. So yeah, these are things that people say about JJ, and it's no wonder that the 49ers, felt like he was deserving. All he did was miss 1 week of OTAs, and they were like, okay, fine. Like, no, seriously, I think there was way more swirl behind the scenes regarding this extension, but I think it's no surprise why the 49ers felt that he was deserving of this, because it isn't really too much of a surprise for me. Brandon in the comments says, worth it for his blocking alone. Gotta run Sauce Gardner into a Gatorade table. Yeah, I mean, who else can do that, right? Yeah, we'll get to this comment on George Kittle in a bit. Stay tuned. He did give us some updates about his soft core injury. And there's some good news with that as well. Invader 49er says Ayuk's deal is probably going to be 70 million guaranteed and average 24 million a year. I think it'll be more than that. I mean, I don't know about the guarantees, but I feel like the average per year would be more. But who knows? It really depends what Ayuk and his agent care about most. Do you care about the average per year and having that look high and so you get praise for doing this deal, or do you want what really matters, which is the guarantees? But that is also harder to get from these NFL teams. So yeah, we'll see. I really think it's not going to be that much more or that much less than the Amon-Ra St. Brown deal, whether we're talking about APY or guarantees for Brandon Ayuk. I just think it's going to be very much in that range, and I think it'll probably vary just a few $1,000,000 more or less from the Amon-Ra St. Brown deal. So that's kind of where I'm putting him. And Rob D talking about Jauan Jennings' 19 catches. Those were clutch catches. I agree, especially in the Super Bowl, which I don't think those 19 catches include playoffs? I don't remember. But yeah, obviously any time that he got the football, I mean, it was usually in clutch situations. There's a reason he got the nickname Third and Jauan. And like I said, there was a reason that he was on his way to being Super Bowl MVP. So he definitely rises to the occasion, something that, the 49ers definitely happy to have. I mean, Ricky Pearsall is on his rookie contract. So the good thing with that, we don't have to worry about him getting paid for quite some time. He's gonna stay with his rookie deal. Although he did sign his rookie deal, right? I remember there were still like one or two of the rookies who hadn't gotten their deals yet. Did Ricky sign yet? He might still be unsigned. So I don't know. I guess that is we'll have to wait and see, but it's not going to be that much. It's going to be your typical rookie deal. Yeah, you guys laughing at the George Kittle hair comments. Yeah, make sure you guys hit that like button. Audio listeners, leave a rating, leave a review. All right. Congrats to Jauan Jennings. All right. Like I said, the risk paid off for him. We already talked about what this means for Brandon Ayuk. Yes, I do still think the 49ers can afford Brandon Ayuk even with this contract. I don't think this really changes much on that front. We've got to be a little more patient because Brandon Ayuk's deal is going to be just a little bit bigger than Jauan Jennings. So there's going to be a lot more back and forth to figure out the details on that one. But let's move things along here. So as far as guys who were not in the building for OTAs today, and again, this is now the second week of OTAs. We had reports of a couple of guys who weren't there last week, and a lot of them were expected. Some of them were a surprise. Some of them didn't really have explanations, but again, it's voluntary OTAs, right? So it's not that big of a deal, but let's look at who still is not available even in week 2 of OTAs. So Mooney Ward, that's not a surprise because he said, he's still progressing, rehabbing through his core muscle injury when he was on the Kay Adams show. And so he's expected to be back sometime around training camp. So definitely not going to be participating in OTAs. He might actually be in the building for mandatory minicamp, but of course he's not going to be participating for that either. So not much of a reason for him to be there at OTAs. And we have Brandon Ayuk. Of course, that's an obvious one. We know why he's not there. Chris Conley, he wasn't there last week as well. Chris Conley's a veteran. I mean, I feel like his spot on this roster or his spot with the team, whether that be on the roster or more likely on the practice squad, is pretty solidified. I don't see what benefit he gets from being at OTAs. Then we have Christian McCaffrey. And so Christian McCaffrey, the initial thoughts and speculations were that the reason he was not at OTAs was because he wants a new deal or he wants a raise. And this is an interesting one. I know that, again, for the most part, it's been speculation, but there might be some truth to this, seeing as how it's the second week of OTAs and he's still not there. That definitely raises some eyebrows. Want to get to Christian McCaffrey and dive into that a little bit more, but let's continue running down this list. Talanoa Hufanga, as you guys know, obvious reason he's not there. He's still progressing from his ACL injury. Although last week he was there, but just working on the sideline. Per Nick Wagner, who I'm gathering this information from today's practice, he did not see Talanoa Hufanga, so I guess he wasn't there today. Another guy who was there last week but not there today was John Feliciano. John Feliciano was the interim starting center because Jake Brendel was out last week. Jake Brendel's still not there today. John Feliciano, who filled in for him, also not there. So you might be wondering, okay, who was a starting center today if both of those guys were out? We'll talk about that in a bit because we do know who that is. Dre Greenlaw also not present. Obvious reason, he is still coming back from Achilles injury. Chris Hubbard, he hasn't been there this entire time through the first 2 weeks either. That's an interesting one because he was a late free agent signing, so you would think he'd want to be in the building to quickly acclimate himself with the team, although he is a veteran. And I know he was coming off an injury from this past season, so could feel like he doesn't have too much to gain from being there at OTAs. Again, voluntary. Jake Brendel, as I mentioned, not there. Trent Williams, not there, although that's not surprising at all. I mean, and there doesn't seem to be any worry about Trent Williams not being there. Cam Latu, this is the second week that he's not been there. Now, Matt Barrows reported last week he was there, but he wasn't participating. That leaves me to believe that maybe he's dealing with an injury. I don't know. I mean, he might still be recovering from last year's injury. It's not great. It's not great for Cam Latu that he's not available for OTAs. We talk about OTAs not being super important, but for guys who are, kind of scraping for some opportunities or to prove themselves, it is important. So not great for Cam Latu. Drake Jackson, another guy who I think is still, not ready yet. And that's a shame as well because Drake Jackson, another guy who I think we need to see that he's taken another step, and we're going to have to wait a little bit longer. Also, Malik Collins, who, Kyle Shanahan had said that he wasn't going to be participating or he wasn't going to be there until his children's graduation. So I'm assuming that has not happened yet, but I guess we'll just have to wait and see. Today is May 29th. The next and last OTAs practice is going to be on the 31st. So does Malik Collins plan to be in the building for that? I don't know. And we probably won't find out if he will be there because I don't think the media is going to be there for that practice. So, but, another newcomer who could benefit from being there and just getting, again, acclimated with some guys. But let's circle back. I keep saying circling back. Damn you, corporate jargon. All right, let's get back to Christian McCaffrey here. So one thing that was really interesting about Christian McCaffrey, I think it was like again, there was a lot of speculation about why he wasn't there. Then I think it was Pro Football Talk that said that he wasn't missing OTAs because of contractual reasons, which I don't know where that came from, but I guess that's what they said. And then Tim Kawakami from The Athletic, um, within the last day, put out an article. And basically, the premise of the article was that, hey, Jed York is going to have to be willing to dish out money for a lot of these guys who are looking for new contracts. Is he willing to do that? That was kind of like the theme of the article. But in it, Kawakami did talk about Christian McCaffrey quite a bit. And he had this little excerpt that I pulled from it. Quote, McCaffrey might be a lot happier if the rest of his contract, 24 million over 2 years, was guaranteed plus another year added instead of having his fate decided on a yearly basis from here on out, end quote. So this certainly, and this wasn't the only quote again about Christian McCaffrey in this piece that would lead me and everyone else to believe that the reason that Christian McCaffrey is not at OTAs is in fact a contractual reason, and that he wants to get paid more. And this quote here from TK definitely seems to suggest that Christian McCaffrey wants some more guarantees, which I don't blame him, and wants another year added because he has 2 extra years. So this is definitely interesting for Christian McCaffrey. Although, again, when you really dig deep into this, honestly, you don't have to dig deep into it. It's not surprising why he would want to get paid more. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, he's already the highest paid running back. What more could he want? Well, running backs get paid badly. Like, I wanted to swear right there, but I try to keep it clean for the children. But they get paid like crap, And so Christian McCaffrey being at the top of his game with this San Francisco team, I mean, hey, this is as good a time as any to ask for more money, especially when you put it into the context, not just of how much better he is than like other running backs in this league statistically, this past season and when he's been with the 49ers, but if you compare him to some of the other players on this team, I mean, look, right now, what I'm showing are the 2023 pass catching stats. Just pass catching, all right? Beyond this, you already know what Christian McCaffrey has done. He was Offensive Player of the Year, 1,459 rushing yards, 2,023 all purpose yards, all right? But in a vacuum, if we just look at the pass catching stats, 79 targets, 67 catches, 564 yards, 1.5 drop percentage. That was the best drop percentage compared to any of the 49ers top 3 pass catchers that the 49ers have. And then he had 7 receiving touchdowns as well. Again, this is only looking at pass catching. We know Christian McCaffrey's main job is being the running back of this team, and we know how good he is at that already. So you compare it to some of these other numbers. You got Brandon Ayuk, 120 targets, 84 receptions, 1,491 yards, 2.3 drop percentage, 8 touchdowns. Debo and Kittle also had 7 receiving touchdowns and a little over 1,000 yards for each of those guys, on a little over 100 targets. And both Debo and Kittle had 73 receptions. So I don't know, when you kind of look at this and you realize what Christian McCaffrey does as a whole for this offense, for this team, like, it's pretty crazy. Like, he absolutely should be asking for more money from, like, the player business standpoint, yes. I mean, I know that complicates things for the 49ers potentially, but I mean, I'm always pro players getting paid, especially, running backs in the early going of their career. And Christian McCaffrey's still pretty young. So again, this is the best time for him to ask for a raise. And I think the 49ers will give it to him. They're a little preoccupied with a couple of other things right now, although they were able to get the Jauan Jennings deal done. We don't know how long that was in the works, but Brandon Ayuk deal also getting worked on. Christian McCaffrey could make some small tweaks again to just make him a happy man, and that could include guarantees, as Tim Kawakami suggested in his article for The Athletic. So this is something we're going to continue to monitor. And yes, Technic Chic, we're going to put a pin on the Christian McCaffrey discussion to bring back more corporate jargon to this podcast. And we'll revisit at a later time. Let's sync back later. All right, let me check a couple of these comments. Yeah, so Invader said Pearsall isn't signed. Okay, yeah, I wasn't sure because at one point there were two of the rookies for the 49ers who hadn't signed, and I think it might have been, was it Jared Kingston? I don't know. It was someone random that I was like, okay, that's surprising. And then it was Pearsall. So Pearsall's still awaiting his contract, but I don't know. Usually it's just minor things that get negotiated there. Not worried about the Pearsall contract. Let's see. Rob D says Jeff Garcia did an awesome interview tonight on East Coast Red and Gold podcast. Suggest you check it out. He got me hyped for the season, dude. I gotta give a shout out to the East Coast Red and Gold podcast. If you guys haven't checked it out, I've been on their show a couple of times. They have wonderful guests. Like, they are pulling great guests onto their show, and I love that. I mean, as a 49er fan, what more could you want? So Jeff Garcia, that's an awesome guest, and I have no doubt that he was a great interview. So yeah, we will be checking that out. That is on YouTube, East Coast Red and Gold, Jeff Garcia. If you search that on YouTube, I'm sure it'll come up. I'll have to check that out. Technic She said, if Debo wanted to get paid well for his wide back status, CMC might want to be paid for his dual threat abilities as well. Absolutely. To further put the Christian McCaffrey conversation into context, I have more numbers about Christian McCaffrey, right? I talked about the 1,459 rushing yards, 2,023 all-purpose yards. He also accounted for 126.4 all-purpose yards per game during the regular season. That was best in the league. He tied for most touchdowns in the league with, former 49er Raheem Mostert with 21. And then he had 114 first downs gained for the 49ers this season. Again, that's like all-purpose first downs, whether it be receiving or as a rusher. 114 first downs for the 49ers is what he contributed. That was league best. The second best was CeeDee Lamb. Do you want to guess how many he had for the Cowboys? 86. So Christian McCaffrey, 114 first downs in 2023. CeeDee Lamb, second, with 86. That is a stark difference. Again, just goes to show how impactful Christian McCaffrey is to this offense. The second best in first downs on the 49ers was Brandon Ayuk, who had 81 first downs for the team. Now, speaking of Debo, in his awesome, unprecedented, we may never see anything like it again 2021 season, Debo had 1,771 all-purpose yards that season. He had 72 first downs. So even when we look at Debo's incredible 2021 season, which we can largely attribute to Debo getting his big payday for, even that is lower of a number than what Christian McCaffrey did for the 49ers in 2023. So you think about how much Debo got paid after that. Christian McCaffrey definitely deserves more. Now, I don't know if we still got to keep in mind that Christian McCaffrey is a running back, so he deserves more money. It'd be hard to say he deserves more money than Debo Samuel, because Debo Samuel's a wide receiver, and then you get into the whole politics of like positional value in the NFL, which again, like running backs not historically, but like running backs in the last decade or so, their value has really plummeted. So again, Christian McCaffrey, who has kind of been an outlier of a bell cow for his respective team, I mean, he definitely deserves more. And on top of that, I mean, I do really think that he's wanting to have all running backs get paid a little bit more. And Christian McCaffrey being at the top of his game and knowing that if he knows that he can push the envelope, not just for himself, but for other running backs who are looking to get paid after him, and not to say that they would get paid more than him, but it just raises the ceiling a little bit so that there's more room for running backs to get paid more. I really think that Christian McCaffrey, who was pretty open about like the disparity of pay for running backs, and just how he feels about that, I really do think that is also, kind of intertwined in all of this as well. So yeah, we'll continue to talk about Christian McCaffrey in the coming days, I'm sure. Rob D says, of course he wants to get guaranteed pay. Who doesn't want a better deal, especially the way he was used, was responsible for like 30% of the offense last season. Yeah, like at least. And he's like one single player. So it's pretty crazy. Invader 49er says CMC playing more wide receiver might extend his career, plus it pays more. Yeah, like I mean, obviously that's interesting, right? I don't know if he'd be interested in changing his position. I don't think the 49ers would necessarily be interested in changing his position, because then it would mean he'd get paid a lot more. But yeah, I mean, value wise, he is definitely up there. All right. Well, let's get back to talking about a couple of other guys who were not there. So again, next one to talk about is John Feliciano, Jake Brendel. We mentioned Jake Brendel last week, knee tendonitis. That's the reason he wasn't there. Last week, John Feliciano was there, and John Feliciano took over a spot as the starting center. John Feliciano was not there today, Wednesday, May 29th. So who was the guy in their place? Well, we did learn who that guy was, and it was actually Ben Bartch, who the 49ers, I think they signed him last season. I'm not even remembering, but like I know he was coming off of an ACL, and so he was the guy. Surprising enough, he was the guy who filled in for Brendel and Feliciano. Now, the question from Invader 49er says, can Ben Bartch win the center job from Brendel? I would say that's on the surface. I would say that that'd be tough, right? I think it would be John Feliciano who would be more likely. But hearing Ben Bartch getting that opportunity today without Feliciano there definitely was interesting. And then Chris Foerster spoke with the media today, and he was actually asked about Ben Bartch and just how he was progressing, coming back from his ACL tear. And this is what Chris Foerster had to say. Quote, he's taken a step. Now we're playing in, he said, now we're playing in shorts, but he's looked very, very good at center and guard. And we'll see when we get the pads on if he's able to play with a little more anchor, a little more strength. but right now he looks like he's been here for 3 or 4 years and has fit in very well. We're happy with Ben." End quote. That is like that's pretty high praise. I mean, I don't like tune into a lot of Chris Foerster pressers, and this could very well just be coach speak. But the fact that we heard that Ben Barch was like filling in as a starting center today, and then you have Chris Foerster after practice saying this, I mean, he looks like he's been here 3 or 4 years. That's huge. And if you kind of pay attention to like when guys that the 49ers have like drafted kind of seem to start to hit a peak, it is kind of at that 3 year mark for some of those like later round guys that they like kind of have to develop. And so for him to say that, it's kind of like Ben Barch maybe reaching his peak with the 49ers. I don't know. It's intriguing for sure. To go back to the question of, is Ben Barch capable of taking the center job from Brendel? I don't know. If Brendel deals with knee tendonitis throughout the season and he's hurt, then yeah, absolutely. Like I still think John Feliciano is like the next man up there at that center spot. But definitely interesting to hear this about Ben Barch, and it could mean that he's way more in favor, I guess, of making this 53 than I thought. Now again, it's May, right? And even as Foerster noted, they're playing in shorts, like they're not even in pads yet. But I mean, so far it seems to be looking good. So good for him. And apparently I need to check out more of Chris Foerster's pressers. I did check out the transcript of it, of today's session, and he had some like lengthy answers for some things. So I really do appreciate when coaches give that much depth and that much insight in their answers. Yeah. So 49ers signed them off the Jags practice squad last year. So yeah, I mean, and because of that, I wasn't assuming much from Ben Barch, like I just thought, I'm pretty sure last year I was like, he's a camp body. He's nothing more than that. And this year going into it, I'm like, yeah, he's just depth. He's just camp body again. He's probably on the outside looking in to make the roster. But this is definitely interesting, especially because Nick Zakelj, who the 49ers drafted, like 2-3 years ago at this point, I mean, they kind of had him slated to be like guard center. And, he was kind of talked about as being this potential center of the future. We haven't really seen that from him. Instead, you have a guy like Ben Barch who's come in and kind of taken that opportunity. You would have thought a guy like Nick Zakelj, who has been here, would maybe get that spot after no Brendel, no Feliciano at today's practice. Oh, next up, probably going to be Nick Zakelj. No. So that tells me a little bit about that as well. And maybe who I thought was on the outside looking in for this offensive line group, maybe I don't really have a good grasp on that right now. Clearly, there's some other favorites, and Ben Barch is one of them. So definitely looking forward to what more gets said about Ben Barch this offseason. So we'll keep tabs on it. All right. Technic Chic said Foerster had some interesting stuff to say about how they draft offensive line in certain rounds, balancing between having them above a certain ability and still being okay developing them. Technic Chic, you are reading my mind, because that was the second thing I wanted to talk about in regards to Chris Foerster. First, I wanted to bring up this quote. He was asked about Dominic Pooney, what they said, what he felt about him. And here's what he had to say, quote, "He's not the prototypical little quick guy. He is a guy that's got the size range and length. He was a very good pass blocker in college. That should translate to our game. And then getting him to do our run game is going to be his biggest adjustment. So just all the traits that we need in our system. It didn't jump off the tape, but it was there." End quote. This one was interesting too. Like I don't know like how I felt about this one. Like I don't know if this was like great or like kind of a head scratcher cuz like he does admit that like Pooney is not typically what they would go after, although obviously the shuttle time is fast, but as far as his um size, not really the smaller guy. But I guess in that sense you could look at it as, hey, like he's big, he has long arms, and yet he still has a fast shuttle time. So I could look at it that way. But the part where he says just all the traits that we need in our system, it didn't jump off the tape, but it was there. That was interesting too. I don't know how to what to make of that. But obviously, Pooney someone I'm excited for and I'm looking forward to seeing more this off season. And so yes, technically to your point, the other part that Foerster was asked about in regards to the 49ers like not taking an offensive lineman earlier in the draft. Foerster said, quote, "This is my personal opinion. If they ask me, invest in guys that touch the ball, guys that can touch the ball and score touchdowns. And then there's a range of guys, second, third, fourth round, fifth round even, that we will find starting offensive linemen in," end quote. So Forster seems to be of the same mind and the same philosophy as John Lynch, Kyle Shanahan, in that they're really not worried about investing in offensive line early in the draft when in their minds they can get a starting offensive lineman later in the draft. And I guess like develop them, but I don't know. I mean, I don't know how I feel about that one. I do like the Pooney pick, all right, and they did draft him in the third round, yes, but I do still wish that they did invest a little bit more or like just target offensive linemen a little bit earlier. Now, I do get the argument that you can say, well, they could have drafted an offensive lineman in the first round, and it's no guarantee that that guy that they pick up would start right away and would beat out Colton McKivitz or one of the other starters. Like there's no guarantee of that. So, and that's fair. I mean, that could very well be true. And it is true that offensive lineman is probably one of the least NFL ready positions in football, just from the standpoint of the transition from college to the NFL is so stark that for a lot of guys it is difficult. There's a learning curve, and even more so when you think about like the 49ers scheme, and they put a lot on their offensive linemen as far as what they need to know right offhand. So I mean, I guess they're more comfortable developing their offensive linemen and just making sure that they can coach them up to their scheme. But that's why having the traits is important. Like the traits is a must. And that's one thing that the 49ers have been consistent with, that even if they draft an offensive lineman in the second round or the sixth, like they are looking for the same traits in all of those guys and just, seeing if they can develop those guys down the line. So, one could argue or question who have the 49ers developed, really. I mean, I think it's a valid question. I mean, they haven't developed a ton of guys. Colton McKivitz, developed for a couple years before, having his first season as a starter last year. And I mean, we kind of saw how that went. Again, learning curve, but yeah, he'll continue to develop, I think. So that's one example. I mean, Spencer Burford, I don't know how that really went or worked out for them. Aaron Banks, he's starting. He's been a pretty good starter, but they drafted him in the second round, so that's a pretty good investment, second round. So I don't know. I don't know. I don't know if I agree with the philosophy, but they seem pretty set in their ways with their thoughts on drafting offensive line. Leon Sandcastle, great YouTube username, by the way, says Foerster gives essays out when he answers questions. I love it. Yeah, really in-depth stuff. So if you guys, watching could ever catch Chris Foerster presser, you should do it. And I definitely should tune into more of them as well. Britt asks, how am I doing tonight? I am doing fantastic. Thank you for asking. Hope you are doing well as well. The Punisher. I do like the nickname for Dominic Pooney, the Punisher. Yeah, it's pretty solid. I like that. Invader 49er says, I liked when Foerster pointed out that there's a line regarding OL talent that you want to be at or slightly above to win with. Yeah, I mean, and obviously, like they know what that is. They've maintained a pretty consistent level, I would say, of offensive line play. Like it hasn't reached. I would say last year was probably their quote unquote. Well, maybe not their worst, but it was the thing with offensive line is that oftentimes it starts out a little shaky early in the season, especially when you have one or two new guys on the line. And then as the season goes on, like it will improve and it kind of like plateaus and like you can it's stable. So, yeah, right now I feel like the 49ers have a stable offensive line. And as of right now, like I think we're kind of projecting the same starters as last year that ended the season. You know, assuming that Jake Brendel is healthy to start the season, he would remain at center, and assuming that John Feliciano remains as the right guard over Spencer Burford. All right, man, you guys are blowing up these comments. I love it. Let me get to it. Yeah, you guys are awesome. All right. So that's the stuff on Chris Foerster. I thought that again, he had some good insight for us. The other coach who spoke today was Brian Schneider, 49ers special teams coordinator. And he had some interesting things to say about the rule change with returns. And he said, quote, there's 31 other coaches like me that don't know exactly if we're on the right track. What's it going to look like? Right now, I feel good finally with the players and getting their input and working through it all. I'm fired up. This is the coolest thing to happen in terms of in my coaching career because it's what are you going to do? You have a great opportunity to do something that's never been done before. So it's a race to figure it out and it's going to be constantly adjusting, end quote. I like him saying he was fired up. He did at other points in the presser, like kind of admit like he was anxious when he first heard about the rule change. And I mean, I'm sure it threw every special teams coordinator into a tizzy when they found out about it because I mean, it's something so new and so different than what was done before. And yeah, it's something that's going to impact every single team in the NFL. So there's something comforting in that, just knowing that, hey, like we're not going to be the only team that's going to be trying to figure this out. All of the other teams going to be on the same boat. And, it just seems like Schneider's really looking forward to looking at the opportunity of, just seeing what they can do. And because it's new, it's like we could do something no one's ever done before. I mean, I was going to say there are no rules, but like, obviously it's a rule, but it's like, because it hasn't, it's its first year, how teams kind of go about it, I guess, like in that regard, there's no rules. So another thing that Brian Schneider was asked, he was asked about all the options he has at return man, or all the return men that he has as options for the new rule. And I mean, he didn't really mention anyone who's like winning the competition so far or a favorite. So he was just mentioning that he really enjoys the fact that he has so many options and so many guys, and there's a lot of competition. So I'm excited about that too. I mean, I want to see who's going to be the guy that rises to the occasion with so much competition, because as we've seen, some guys have made it look harder than it needs to be. I think having extra competition and just seeing how it shakes out, like, that will give them the best option. That sounds obvious, right? But like, clearly a guy who can handle competition, probably more likely to handle in-game pressure as well. And so may the best man win. And I'm sure during training camp we'll get a good look at some of the guys who have kind of passed the initial eye test for Brian Schneider, and we'll see who's getting some looks to be the new return man. I'm sure they'll continue to be testing that out. All right, other pieces of news. So George Kittle, going back to him, he did talk to the media today, as I said, and he did talk about his core muscle injury. He said he started to feel that around week 9, week 10, obviously played through it. As far as how he's been progressing, he said, quote, progressing as planned. The goal is to be back ready for training camp, and all signs point to I will be ready for training camp, end quote. That's great on the George Kittle front. He will be healthy if everything continues to progress as it has been for training camp. So that's a good sign. Rock Ya-Sin, 49ers corner, who they signed this offseason, he limped to the sideline in the early going of practice. It didn't seem, per the reports, that he returned. I have to say, I didn't see a lot of tweets about how today's practice actually went, like who looked good, all this stuff. I suppose maybe some of the media members are waiting to put it in their articles and don't want to spoil anything. So for now, I got slim pickings on some of the reports. But from Grant, I saw Grant Cohn did mention another cornerback who the 49ers signed this offseason, Isaac Yiadom, was getting beat, quote, left and right by everybody, end quote. Added that Renardo Green is the third best corner. That's what, in Grant's opinion, he is the third best corner behind Mooney Ward and Diamador Lenore. That's not at all surprising to me, because I think Renardo Green, yeah, he's definitely built to compete right away. And I think that comes from him being like NFL ready. And I think his play style translates immediately into the NFL, and just how physical he is. So excited about Renardo Green, and to hear that. Yeah, I think he's definitely going to make some noise this year, especially if guys like Isaac Yiadom not rising to the occasion in OTAs. Again, it's early, but those are the early reports. And then Rock Ya-Sin will have to, I guess, keep a tab on that and see what happened with him in practice. Hopefully, it's not too serious. And yeah, I already mentioned that Ben Barch was the starting center with the first unit today, with Brendel and Feliciano out. So yeah, all in all, a pretty decent day of OTAs news and updates. 49ers gave Jauan Jennings an extension. We love that for him. And I mean, it's nice to talk about actual football, Definitely love that. Like I said, Friday is going to be the final day of OTAs for the 49ers. I don't think the media is going to be there, so this is probably the last OTAs report that we're going to get. Now, shortly after that, June 4th through June 6th, the 49ers will be holding their mandatory minicamp. Mandatory. That's the difference between OTAs and mandatory minicamp. So that will be a good test to see who of the people who didn't show up for OTAs, Brandon Ayuk, Christian McCaffrey, I'm looking at you guys, who of those guys will actually show up for mandatory minicamp. All right. So I'm really interested to find that out. Before I head out, let me just check into a couple of these comments. Let's see here. All right. Al Bundy says, do you like Jennings' contract? I don't. Should have just gave the cap room to Ayuk. I don't mind the Jennings contract. I mean, for 2024 cap, it's just about $2 million more. And that's just an assumption, right? We don't have the year-to-year breakdown of the 2-year deal. But on average, we can say that it's $2 million more. It might even be less than that, depending on how they kind of structured it. But we'll have to wait and see. I have no problem with the contract, though. I think it was deserved. All right. Yeah, you guys mentioning a couple of guys who could potentially be the new kick returners. They definitely have options. Pearsall, Garendo, Cowing. Those are some fast guys who could definitely be in the mix. Trent Taylor as well. Yeah, they have options. They have a lot of options. We love to see it. JD Durham, thank you so much for the donation. You know, I appreciate it. You didn't even want to leave a comment. You just said, here's $2. Thank you so much. Appreciate the love. Too Much Sauce asks, Mavs or Timberwolves? I gotta be honest with you. I have not been watching the NBA playoffs at all because the Warriors aren't in it. I only really follow the Warriors, and so they were just sad this year. So I didn't watch. I was kind of like tuning in to, well, not actually tuning in, but I was somewhat paying attention to the Nuggets just because I live in Colorado. But I mean, I don't really care about them either. So. Aren't the Mavs winning that series though, like by a lot? Aren't they like 2-0 or 3-0 over the Wolves? I guess I'll say Mavs. I'll go with who's up in that series. Although I do like the Timberwolves guy, Anthony Edwards. I think he's an exciting player. All right. All right, yeah. I mean, you guys, some of you seem to agree that you like the contract for Jennings. KJ said it lowers the cap hit. Good contract. Yeah, it very well could lower the cap hit. His cap hit for 2024 would have been 4.9 million. Again, if he was on it, the second round tender. So it's possible they could have lowered that for 2024 and then had the majority of the rest of the money go towards 2025. It's possible. They could have also had some void years. Again, we don't know how this contract is structured. I always say, like, I mean, take the initial numbers with a grain of salt. It's okay to have an opinion on it, but like, don't have super strong opinions on it until we actually see the breakdown, because oftentimes the breakdowns reveal that the contract really not that bad. So let's just wait for those numbers and we'll see what that looks like. All right, guys, I really appreciate you, because I was like, I gave you guys the challenge to keep this live chat popping, and you guys did that. So appreciate the love. Make sure you like this video if you haven't yet. Make sure you subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet. Audio listeners, leave a rating, leave a review. Appreciate you guys. This is my last show of the week, at least on my channel. Tomorrow I will be on Mariah's channel for the Two Goats show. Actually, I lied. I'm going to have Tracy Sandler on my channel tomorrow. She is one of the 49ers credential media members. So I'm going to pick her brain on OTAs and what's been happening there since she's been in the trenches checking that out for us. So make sure you guys tune into that tomorrow. Hit that notification bell so you know when I go live. For now, guys, have a good rest of your Wednesday. Peace.